The cameras were rolling, the audience was cheering, and then 18-year-old Yasmin Al-Hassan stood at the Family Feud podium, wearing the hijab her mother had lovingly adjusted before they left home that morning, her hands trembling slightly as she faced a question that struck at the very heart of the internal conflict that had been tearing her apart for the past 3 years. When Steve Harvey asked about things you hide from your family, Yasmin's response, delivered with the quiet desperation of someone who had been carrying a secret that felt like betrayal of everything her family held sacred, would reveal a crisis of faith so profound it threatened to destroy the relationships that meant everything to her. "That I've lost my faith," Yasmin had said, the words hanging in the air like a confession that could never be taken back, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of years of internal struggle, doubt, and the terrifying realization that she no longer believed in the religion that had shaped every aspect of her identity, her family's identity, and the community that had raised her with love and unwavering devotion. The studio had fallen into a silence that felt different from any other pause in the game. This was the silence of people processing something deeply personal, something that touched on the most fundamental questions of belief, identity, and what happens when the faith that defines a family becomes a source of division rather than unity. Yasmin Al-Hassan had been raised in a devoutly Muslim household, where faith wasn't just a personal belief, but the foundation of every decision, every relationship, and every aspect of daily life. Her parents, Omar and Fatima Al-Hassan, had immigrated to the United States from Syria when Yasmin was 5 years old, bringing with them a deep commitment to their Islamic faith that had sustained them through the challenges of starting over in a new country, learning a new language, and building a life while maintaining their cultural and religious identity. The Al-Hassan family had been pillars of their local mosque community, with Omar serving on the board of directors and Fatima organizing charitable events and religious education programs. Yasmin had grown up attending Islamic school on weekends, participating in community service projects, and being held up as an example of a young Muslim woman who successfully balanced her faith with academic achievement and community involvement. For the first 15 years of her life, Yasmin had embraced her faith wholeheartedly. She had found comfort in the structure of daily prayers, had felt connected to something larger than herself during religious services, and had taken pride in her identity as a Muslim woman who could excel in academics while maintaining her religious observance. She had planned to attend a university with a strong Muslim student association, to marry within her faith community, and to raise her own children with the same values and beliefs that had guided her parents. But during her sophomore year of high school, Yasmin had begun to experience doubts that started small and gradually grew into questions she couldn't ignore. It had started with academic discussions in her world history and philosophy classes, where she had been exposed to different religious traditions and philosophical perspectives that had made her think critically about the beliefs she had always accepted without question. The doubts had been painful and confusing because they weren't based on anger or rebellion against her family or community. Yasmin loved her parents deeply, respected their sacrifices and dedication, and valued the moral framework and sense of community that her faith had provided. But intellectually and emotionally, she had begun to question whether the fundamental premises of religious belief, the existence of God, the authority of religious texts, the concept of divine revelation, were actually true or simply comforting stories that helped people cope with uncertainty and mortality. The crisis had intensified during her junior year when Yasmin had taken advanced placement courses in biology and physics that had deepened her understanding of scientific explanations for natural phenomena. While she knew that many people successfully reconciled religious faith with scientific knowledge, Yasmin had found herself increasingly convinced that natural processes could be explained without invoking supernatural causes, and that the universe's complexity and beauty didn't necessarily require divine creation. But perhaps most troubling for Yasmin had been the gradual realization that she no longer felt the spiritual connection that had once been central to her religious experience. Prayer had begun to feel like empty ritual rather than communication with the divine. Religious services had become exercises in going through motions rather than moments of transcendence or community connection. The comfort and guidance she had once drawn from religious teachings had been replaced by a sense that she was maintaining beliefs she no longer actually held. The internal conflict had been devastating because Yasmin couldn't separate her loss of faith from her love for her family and community. Every family dinner that began with prayer, every religious holiday celebration, every conversation about Islamic values and traditions had become a reminder of the growing distance between her internal reality and the person her family believed her to be. She felt like she was living a lie that grew more elaborate and painful every day. Yasmin had tried desperately to recapture her faith through increased religious study, deeper prayer practices, and conversations with religious leaders who had known her since childhood. She had hoped that her doubts were temporary, a normal part of religious development that would resolve itself with time and effort. But the more she studied and reflected, the more convinced she had become that her loss of faith was genuine and permanent, rather than a phase she would outgrow. The most heartbreaking aspect of Yasmin's situation had been her certainty that revealing her loss of faith would devastate her parents, who had sacrificed enormously to provide her with opportunities while maintaining their religious and cultural identity. She knew that Omar and Fatima saw her success as validation of their decision to emigrate, their commitment to their faith, and their ability to raise a daughter who could thrive in America while remaining true to Islamic values. Yasmin had watched her parents' pride when teachers praised her academic achievements, when community members commended her religious observance, when younger students in the Islamic school looked up to her as a role model. She had seen how much joy her parents derived from sharing her accomplishments with relatives back in Syria, describing how their daughter was excelling in school while maintaining her faith and cultural identity. The thought of telling them that she no longer believed in the religion that had guided their entire lives felt like betraying not just their faith, but their sacrifices, their dreams, and their understanding of who she was as their daughter. Yasmin had feared that revealing her atheism would be interpreted as rejection of them personally, as ingratitude for everything they had provided, or as evidence that they had failed as parents to properly transmit their values to their child. The Family Feud appearance had been planned during Eid celebrations when the family had been feeling particularly close and grateful for their blessings. Omar had thought that appearing on television as a family would be a positive representation of Muslim Americans and an opportunity to show that people of faith could participate fully in American culture while maintaining their religious identity. During the pre-show preparations, Yasmin had felt the familiar weight of maintaining her false persona, smiling and participating in family interactions while internally struggling with the knowledge that she was deceiving people she loved more than anything in the world. She had worn her hijab and modest clothing, not as expressions of faith, but as costumes that allowed her to continue hiding her true beliefs from her family. The game had been proceeding normally, with the Al-Hassan family playing enthusiastically against the Johnson family from Texas. Omar had answered questions about work and current events, Fatima had contributed knowledge about cooking and household management, and Yasmin's younger brother Ahmed had shown his expertise in sports and technology. Yasmin had participated appropriately, but had felt the familiar tension of monitoring every word and gesture to ensure she didn't inadvertently reveal her loss of faith. But when it came time for the category Things You Hide from Your Family, and it was Yasmin's turn at the buzzer, the question had struck directly at the heart of the secret that had been consuming her emotional energy and sense of authenticity for 3 years. Steve Harvey had approached the podium with his usual warm energy, but something about Yasmin's hesitation and the way she was looking at her family with obvious distress had made him more attentive and gentle than usual. "All right, Yasmin," Steve had said softly. "Things you hide from your family. What comes to mind?" Yasmin had looked at her parents, who were watching with love and encouragement, then at Ahmed, who admired her and looked up to her as his accomplished older sister. In that moment, surrounded by the unconditional love of people who thought they knew who she was, Yasmin had made a decision that terrified her, but that she somehow knew was necessary for her own integrity and emotional survival. "That I've lost my faith," Yasmin had said quietly, her words immediately changing the atmosphere in the studio as everyone present understood they had just witnessed something profound and potentially devastating. The silence that followed had been complete and heavy. Omar and Fatima's faces had shown shock, confusion, and pain as they processed what their daughter had just revealed to them and to millions of television viewers. Ahmed had looked confused and upset, not fully understanding what was happening, but recognizing that something important and difficult had just occurred. Steve had looked at Yasmin with immediate understanding and compassion, recognizing that this young woman had just made one of the most difficult admissions possible, one that threatened her relationship with her family and community, but that represented a choice to live authentically rather than continue hiding her true beliefs. "Yasmin," Steve had said gently, "that must have been incredibly difficult to carry alone." "It has been," Yasmin had replied, tears beginning to form as the relief of finally speaking her truth mixed with terror about what the consequences might be. "I've been trying to believe for 3 years, but I can't make myself believe something that doesn't feel true anymore." Steve had glanced at Omar and Fatima, who were clearly struggling to process this revelation, then back at Yasmin. "Can you help me understand what happened?" Steve had asked with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. What changed for you? Yasmin had taken a deep breath, seeming to gather courage from having already taken the most difficult step. I started asking questions in school about different religions and philosophies. Yasmin had explained, the more I learned about science and different ways of understanding the world, the more I realized I didn't actually believe in God anymore. Not because I'm angry or rebellious, but because it just doesn't make sense to me intellectually. Omar had stepped forward from the family podium, his face showing pain but also love for his daughter. Yasmin, Omar had said, his voice thick with emotion, why didn't you come to us? We could have talked about this. We could have helped you work through your doubts. Because I was afraid you would think I was rejecting you. Rejecting everything you've sacrificed for, Yasmin had replied. Because I know how much your faith means to you, and I didn't want to disappoint you or make you feel like you failed as parents. Steve had looked at this family with obvious respect for the love they shared despite their differences in belief. Omar, Fatima, Steve had said, addressing Yasmin's parents directly. How do you feel hearing this? Fatima had spoken first, her voice trembling but strong. We're hurt and confused, Fatima had said honestly. Our faith is everything to us, but Yasmin is our daughter, and we love her no matter what she believes. Omar had nodded in agreement. We raised her to think for herself, to be honest, to have integrity, Omar had said. If this is what she honestly believes, then we have to respect that, even if we don't understand it. Steve had paused, clearly moved by the family's response and the complexity of the situation. Yasmin, Steve had said, I want you to know that what you just did took incredible courage. Being honest about something this fundamental, especially when you know it might hurt people you love, that's not easy. Steve had begun removing his suit jacket, the gesture carrying special meaning in this moment of family crisis and potential healing. Yasmin, Steve had said, placing the jacket around her shoulders. This jacket represents something important today. It represents the understanding that love doesn't require identical beliefs and that families can survive differences in faith when they're built on genuine care and respect for each other. As Yasmin had pulled the jacket closer, Steve had continued speaking to the entire family. What I'm seeing here is a family that loves each other enough to be honest, even when honesty is painful. That's not common, and it's not easy, but it's real. Steve had turned to address the studio audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve had announced, the Al-Hassan family is showing us something beautiful and difficult. They're showing us that love can be bigger than differences in belief, that families can survive crisis when they choose understanding over judgment. The game had been suspended as the family dealt with this revelation and its immediate emotional impact. Steve had facilitated conversations between Yasmin and her parents, helping them begin to process this new reality and find ways to maintain their relationship despite their fundamental disagreement about faith. The episode aired 6 months later after extensive consultation with religious leaders, family counselors, and experts in interfaith dialogue. It became a powerful example of how families can navigate religious differences while maintaining love and respect for each other. Yasmin had kept Steve's jacket as a symbol of the moment, when she chose authenticity over comfort, when she decided that living honestly was more important than maintaining a false peace. More importantly, she had begun building a new relationship with her family, one based on honesty rather than hidden beliefs. The jacket represented her understanding that love and family bonds could survive religious differences when they were grounded in genuine care, respect, and commitment to understanding, rather than changing each other. Because that's what integrity looks like when it chooses truth over comfort. That's what family sounds like when it chooses love over uniformity. And that's what happens when an 18-year-old woman learns that she can be honest about her deepest beliefs without losing the people who matter most to her, that faith journeys are personal, and that the strongest families are those that can embrace their members' authenticity even when it challenges their own most fundamental assumptions. Yasmin Al-Hassan had spent 3 years hiding her loss of faith, but on that day at Family Feud, she discovered that the love her family had for her was stronger than their religious differences, and that honesty about her beliefs was the foundation for a more authentic relationship with the people she cherished most.